Hello guys and welcome back to another episode. This one's super exciting because we are putting together this 1FZ bloody turbocharged, insane, 1,000 horsepower, 2,000 horsepower. It's going to be a drag car engine. Yeah? No? Go again? Yeah, one more. Is that it? Well, g'day guys, it's Sam here from Built Not Bought. Now in this episode I've been super excited about this one because finally we are putting together this 1FZ engine. There we go, that was like a normal one. Oh my God! Oh, yeah. That was crazy. Alrighty guys, before we go any further, of course, we need to draw the winner of the Pit Viper competition from last week. You know, it still blows me away the amount of entries I get for a pair of bloody sunglasses from the 80s compared to some amazing tools and equipment we give away on this channel. Nevertheless, we're gonna draw the winner and it was Tough Luck's 89. I'm not sure, hopefully you're watching, you can send me a message on Instagram to claim your prize. Otherwise I'll try and figure out a way to contact you through YouTube, hopefully. Anyway, other than that, the only other thing I want to say, this episode is a kind of technical episode. We're going to try and build this motor. So pay attention guys, as much as you can, try and follow me along as we go. But I do want to say I'm not a professional engine builder. In fact, this is the first time I've built a motor on my own. So keep that in mind guys. I'm just trying to do a bit of entertainment here. I'm not trying to show you how to build an engine. So if you build one and it explodes, it's not my fault. Who's ringing me? Hello, Sam speaking. Yeah, if you could, yeah. Only thing I want to say, I actually struggled to find the parts for this motor, and I just want to give a big shout out to the guys at Spool Imports because I couldn't find the bits and pieces to build this motor, but I came across these guys and they all of a sudden had everything I needed, from pistons, rods. They did the head gasket, studs. They could pretty much order anything I needed for this engine, so a big shout out to those guys for helping me source all those parts. So if you are building a turbo engine, definitely check out Spool Imports. Anyway, let's get on with the episode, see how we go with this thing. Alrighty, so last episode you saw that we got all the machining done on the block here. So before I go through and clean it up and get it ready to assemble, what I want to do is set all the ring gaps. Now, basically the ring gap is what seals the oil from the combustion chamber in the cylinder. Being a turbocharged engine, you want to have a slightly bigger ring gap because there's more heat, more pressure, it actually expands and you don't want the rings to butt up. So, bit of calculations, there is a table here. I've done some calculations that is a turbocharged engine, you need the bore times 50 thou. So the bore and stroke on this motor on one of the pistons is 1.957 inches. So I did the calculation, it comes out that the top ring wants to be 20 thou and the bottom ring wants to be 22 thou. So with some feeler gauges, what we're going to do is basically push these rings into the block. So you pick a cylinder, push the ring in, make sure it's the right way facing up. And then I've just got a piston here with a ring on there so I can set it down nice and square. And then you want to get your feeler gauges, set this one to 20. You basically want to just feed it through. And if it doesn't quite fit, you just want to file a piece off. So I'm going to go through and do all these. I've set up a bit of a jig here. So I've got a piece of steel to stop the thing falling back, and you basically just use a file and start filing all the rings. Now one thing when you build an engine, you want to wear gloves. What? Sam's wearing gloves? No, I've still got my thongs on, let's be honest. But yeah, trying to keep everything clean and tidy. So we'll go through and set these ring gaps. A little bit tedious, but once that's done, we can start getting ready to assemble. Alrighty, so just done the ring gaps. This is the last one. Now there's two different seals, obviously the top one and then the bottom ring. This bottom ring's 22 thou, so just put that through. So it looks like all the ring gaps and that are sorted with your oil seal. What do they call them? Oil groove. With the oil groove gap, you just want to make sure that they're not butting up. So I've checked all them and it's fine, but they don't need to be filed necessarily. So we've got to go through now and clean everything up. Get the block super clean because from the machining, you're going to get a bit of swarf in that in there, a bit of oil and grease. So we'll hit it with the air hose thing. Bit of brake cleaner, should come up sweet. Alrighty, so now that we've got the block cleaned up, I've also cleaned up the crank as well, because what we're going to do first is basically set the crank up and make sure all the clearances are right with the bearings. So we'll basically just push the bearings in first into the block, everything dry, and then basically put the crank in, and put the top caps on with the bearings as well. I've got this, where is it? This stuff. Now this is very small and delicate. The machine shop gave me this. It's a little piece of green plastic gooey stuff. Basically peel a bit off with your nail and put it on the crank. And as you tighten up the cap, it'll spread it out, and it'll actually spread it to the width of one of these, and that'll tell you whether it's 1 thou, 1.5, 2 thou, or 3 thou of clearance. So that's how you can check how much clearance you've got in there. So we'll do that in and make sure that we've got enough room in there, make sure everything's gonna not bite up and bind together. Oh yeah, it's in. Okay, we've dropped the crank in. Now you don't want to spin it because everything's dry, but to do this properly you need it dry. Where's my rag? Where's my rag? Those gloves didn't last long, did they? Oh! So just made a discovery that the thrust washer is actually separate on these to the bearing. I was looking for the big bearing for the thrust washer, but basically they're a separate thing, so I'm gonna have to order more because I've lost the ones on the block side. Oops. Anyway. Bit of a roadblock, but that's fine. We can still set this thing up. Essentially just use my nail. Holy sh**. Ah! Oh my God, I've lost it. Not good. Drop it on the crank. There. It's like a bee's dick. Anyway. A day in the life of Sam Miles is riveting content, isn't it? Alrighty, so I'm just gonna put the bearing cap on now. You don't do a full torque up, obviously, because they stretch the bolts, but you just want to nip them up so the face of the bearing is closed up. All right, so that's on there. Nipped them up pretty good. And you obviously don't want to spin the crank because you want to not mush up that little green thing. I have no idea what's going to be under here. Oh my God. There we go, look at that. Alrighty, so if you probably can't see it on camera, but there is a tiny piece of green goo in there, and I can measure it up. 3 thou of clearance. So there we go. We know we've got a bit of clearance between the bearing and the crank, so the oil can move through there. So we're good to go, move forward. Now, I want to next set up that thrust washer bearing, so we're going to have to wait until they arrive, then get a dive gauge on there and measure that, just make sure we've got some clearance there. And then we can move on from that. But while I'm here, I might as well do the same thing with one of the piston rings. Oh, not piston rings, with one of the con rods. So they go on the con rod side, and just make sure that those bearings are cleared as well, and it'll be looking sweet. Oh, all right, here we are, we are back. Where is it? Where is it? Here it is. This is the part we've been waiting on, the thrust washer bearings, whatever you want to call them. Normally on a big end bearing kit, well, not normally, but like old school Chevys and that, they come with a thrust bearing that is part of the bearing kit, but for some reason they're a separate thing to buy, and they're a separate little washer compared to the actual bearing. So they sit in there on that center cap. I think it's the number 5 cap. 1, 2, 3. No, number 4. It's on number 4. So now we can finally lube up the crank, get these thrust washers in there, drop the crank in, and start torquing it. I'm basically building this engine. It's absolutely insane. Finally happening. We kind of wasted the day the other day. We got hooked into it and then realized we needed that part, which sucks because I did have my cameraman booked, and now today I don't. So you're gonna have to deal with the tripod for some of this video, which is a shame, but it is what it is. You can concentrate more on the content than the actual cinematography. All right, but just before we get into this is the first time I'm building an engine solo. I've done it a couple times before, but it's with other people that kind of knew what they were doing. So if anything goes wrong, please let me know in the comments that I might have stuffed something up. And if Jeff, if you're watching, my machinist, please let me know if I need to rip this thing apart and start again. Hopefully I've covered everything. We'll see how we go. I think I know what I'm doing. May do, may not, who knows, but let's hook into it. First, obviously, we're gonna start up. We're gonna lube everything up. We've got proper engine assembly lube. Lube all the crank up, get all these bearings in. Backside of the bearing's going dry, but the side that actually spins, that touches the crank, that side's getting all lubed up. Drop it in, get all the caps on, and then start torquing it up with the sequence. I've got the full torquing specs and sequence out of the manual here for all the stuff that's not ARP bolts. So hopefully we've got all that covered. Anyway, let's hook into it. Alrighty, we've got the crank in there finally, and I've just put on all the bearing caps. Now with the bolts, I did put some lube on the thread and actually the head of the nut as well. So when you torque them up, it doesn't want to grab and give you a false reading. You want everything lubed up so it can spin in nicely. I'm just going to start torquing them up. On the torque spec in here, what are they? Main bearing cap bolt. So the first pass is 74 Newton meters, and then the second stage you tighten to an additional 90 degrees. So obviously the first one's just a torque spec, and that second 90 degrees gives the bolt the stretch it needs. So I'm just going to go through and nip them up slowly, just working inside out, slowly nip them down till they're all kind of firm, and then we'll set that torque setting, go through, torque them all down, and then do that second pass. Alrighty, last bearing cap bolt for that 90 degrees. And I'm making sure I go through and mark every bolt as I torque them so I know that they're done. Crank's in. That is amazing. It's all spinning freely, feeling good. So now the next thing I want to do is just the end flow. I just want to check that, double check, make sure it's in spec, and then we can continue on. I'm puffed after that, wrenching on that thing. All right, so your crank end float is essentially what movement you've got kind of transitional ways, like across the crank. So that's what that thrust washer does. That basically keeps it in line. Now you want about maybe 2 thou of movement in there just for expansion when things heat up. So I've got the micrometer there, that is in millimeters, but 2 thou is equivalent to about half a mil, 0.05 millimeters. Yeah, that's it, 0.05 millimeters. So that's basically 0.1 mil is like from 30 to 40. So as we swing it side to side, you get a couple of screwdrivers, just give it a bit of a wiggle. You can feel that movement in there. Looking at the mic, it's bang on. It's half of a mil. Yeah, the small bit, half of a tenth of a mil. So that's looking good, which means we can continue on with the build. Alrighty, now it's time to start putting the pistons in. We do need to rotate the motor. What way am I going to go? Let's go this way. Oh my God, that's scary. Alright, so to get the pistons, first I had to set up where the ring sat. So I've got a diagram here and it shows where the bottom ring gap goes, top ring gap and the oil rings and that. Basically they're all just got to be offset in relation to the wrist pin there. And then I've gone and just compressed it in the piston compressor. It's basically just like a little ring compressor spring circular thing. I'm not sure, I might have done it too tight, I don't know. But essentially, after that, I've lubed the bearing here and we should be able to just knock it in. Now I'm gonna put all the spool logos to the front. That's how I know the orientation. I've already done it wrong. Oh man. Okay, I'll be back.
A few moments later.
Okay, I'm back. Like I said, I'm working this out as I go. It's the first time I've done one solo. I realized I should stick a bit of the piston out the bottom so you can basically locate it in the hole and then knock it through with the back of a hammer. So the one that I'm gonna put in, obviously make sure that that is on the bottom dead center there, as low as the crank can go so you're not gonna go in and damage anything. Spool logo to the front, get that in there, and basically knock it through. Try and catch it on the other side. This is a bit of a brutal hammer. Oh, look at that. First piston's in. So just repeat that process, get them all in. I'm just gonna finger tight the bolts on the other side and then we'll start torquing it up and whew, we are getting damn close to get this bottom end together. And there's a party going on out there. Why aren't I invited? Right, we're on the last bolt to torque here for the pistons. Oh, there we have it. Rotating assembly is done. Alrighty, so I got a little bit more done last night. I've gone ahead and put the timing chain in gear on. Now there's basically just a little dot on the bottom of the gear and you line it up with the bright linkage on the chain. So that'll happen with the top as well. Normally the recommended chain is like the Iwas chain, but we couldn't get hold of one of them. So the machine shop ended up getting me this other aftermarket one. I forget the brand, OSK or something, OSK. So that's the new chain I put in. Obviously I didn't want to run the gauntlet with the old one. It could be a little bit stretched, which we don't want. So whacked that on, got it all sorted up and put the valve cover on as well. So that's all tensioned up, a bit of gasket goo around that too. So now I'll just put the balancer on. Now what I want to do is actually set top dead center exactly, just to make sure. I'm going to put the little micrometer on the piston here and measure that out in a sec. But first, we'll torque up this balancer bolt. So somewhere in the specs here, these are normally pretty tight. Hang on. 412 Newton meter. What? Let me just check this. Yeah, that's a lot. My torque wrench doesn't even go. That's like basically putting a smart car on the end of your torque wrench. Perfect. All right, now that we've got that monster of a bolt done up, maybe to the right torque setting, we can start looking at getting the absolute top dead center. So, spin that around a bit. So I've set up my micrometer here. So basically, there is a marking on the casing for like top dead center, but to just confirm that and double check, because obviously when the crank swings around at the top of its stroke there, it's kind of just going across lightly, so you can't visually see the piston moving. So you use a micrometer to basically see what you can't. So if we come back past what's top dead center, you'll see the needle to start move up and then it will come down again. And that point where it comes down just there, so I've gone back at 10.1, that is top dead center. So I can mark that. It's just pretty damn close to where the original one is. It's back a tiny bit, but there we have it. I think it's time to get this head on now. That's the next big mission. Alrighty, so putting this head on now, obviously got the head all machined and set up by Crankshaft Engine Center. They've gone through and decked it, cleaned it up, put the valves in, new valve springs. They've done a little bit of flow work as well on the head. But putting it on, there's a couple of important things to remember when you're boosting a motor. The number one thing that happens with these is the head tries to blow off them. You blow head gaskets, break head studs, all sorts of stuff. So you really want to make sure you use a multi-layer steel head gasket. They are the highest quality and they will be the only things that hold your boost in. The other big thing is head studs. Now you've got your ARP 2000s, but these are the next one up. They are the new age 625 plus stud. Now they are super, super strong, but there's a bit of technique to put them in. They're obviously a screw-in stud and then there's a nut on top. So obviously there's a full set of instructions as well that go with these, but you basically screw them in just finger tight with a bit of obviously thread lubricant, get them in there. So they just hit the bottom, don't need to torque them up or anything. And then once the head goes on, that's when you go through and torque the actual nuts up. So we'll get these studs in, get the head gasket on, drop the head on, and then make sure we torque it up properly. Guess in the comments below how much these things cost, just these 14 studs. Guess in the comments. Your mind will be blown. Alright, just got the head on there. It went on super sweet. The gasket's on, got all the studs in. But one thing I did notice, the bolts and washers supplied for the head studs, it didn't look like enough of the thread was peeking through. So I've gone ahead and measured the thread and nut, got that distance, and then put the back end of the vernier into the head. And I've just backed out the studs a little bit just so there's enough thread sticking through so the bolt can go on completely. Otherwise, some of them you might have sort of half thread on and that's not going to be torqued up properly. And you can probably blow one of the nuts off when it's under boost. So I've just backed them out a little bit. It looked like there was plenty of thread on the bottom there. I think that's right to do it. Like these aren't exactly for these engines. It's a bit of a, they're actually for a 3-litre 2JZ motor, so they might be slightly different length, but I think this is the right way to do it so you can get enough thread. There's definitely more than like, you know, that's like 1 centimeter, not even, of thread on the nut there. There's definitely more than that on the other end. So we'll go through and get all these hand tight and screwed on. I'm using some ARP lube as well on each side of the washer and the nut and the thread. And then that means it'll be torqued up properly without any kind of tension and resistance and friction from the face of the surface there. Once it's all torqued down, we can start looking at putting the cams in. Oh, well, you wouldn't bloody read about it. I was putting it together and I had the last nut going in. I was screwing it down like, what is going on? It turns out one of the nuts hasn't even been tapped. It had no thread on it. It's just basically a blank, which is an absolute pain in the ass because I just mentioned how expensive these things are, and you get that kind of bloody, what do you call it? Anyway, I do luckily have a 7/16-20 tap in my set, so I'm gonna try and tap this thing. I mean, I just rang around, it is a Saturday, and I rang around, there's 2 places in Brisbane that sell ARP, and they shut in half an hour, so I can't fly there instantly, and then I'm not gonna wait until Monday to continue with this, because I just don't have the time for that. So, I'm gonna try and tap this, hopefully it's all right. I mean, it doesn't have the full coating on it, but it should be fine in the motor, hopefully. If not, man, I'm gonna have to just pull it apart and do it again. Anyway, let's try and get this thing tapped so we can continue on with this build. Holy smokes, I think I've actually done it. I've got a little thread tester here, so this is the 7/16-20. And if it goes all the way in pretty easy, look at that. Back on track. Alright, and now when you're actually using the torque wrench, there is a little bit of a technique to it. You obviously don't want any binding, any jolting. You want it to be one smooth movement. So you get a good position, pull the wrench around slowly, and you keep that momentum, keep that speed until you hear it click. If you start yanking on it and shoving like this, you're gonna get a false reading. So this one here, we've got going up to 90 on this head stud. So we'll just pull it around. Here's a little more, we'll readjust. And I reckon on this pull, we'll feel it click. Even pressure. One more. Right there, so you hear it click there? It's quite an obvious click, and you'll feel a bit of shock load through the wrench as well, and you'll feel it on your backhand. You know that one's torqued. Alrighty, now we get to the next hard kind of tricky bit. I feel like I'm saying every part of this build is tricky, kind of is. But anyway, putting the cams in, another bit of a mission going on here, being a twin overhead cam. Now, because it's overhead, you're putting it straight onto the valve, so there's pressure on them. So if you just go along and buzz all the caps on, you can actually snap the cam in half because of the pressure on the valve. So you really got to take note of the manual and the installation instruction on this one. Now, the machine shop has already put together what's called a sprung sub gear. So on the inlet cam, there's a little sprung gear that just holds a bit of tension on it to stop that chatter. So, you know, you might hear a lot of noise and chatter in some old cruisers and that, and they may not have tensioned that sub gear there. So that keeps a bit of just tension in the system so it doesn't make that noise. But basically, reading from here, you start with installing the exhaust cam. So that one, what you got to do is you got to drop the cams in with the number 1 and 4 cylinder lobes facing downward. So basically straight onto the valve. Lightly push the camshaft to the front of the engine and install the number 2 and number 5 bearing caps to the original position and tighten evenly. Then there's a bit of a stage there, like to install the next caps. You go number 3, then number 4, then number 6, and number 7, and then number 1, and then uniformly tighten them, starting from the center bolts and working outwards in several passes. So you slowly want to pull that cam down, because if you just ramp it up with a ratchet, it's just going to put too much stress on it and can crack. Now the actual caps, they're all numbered and stuff. So you've got an arrow for forward, E for exhaust, I for inlet, and number 1, 2, 3, 4, right the way back to, I think it's 8 or 9 or something, even more. 1, 2, 3, 7. Okay, 7. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And then just lube the f out of everything, like lube it all. Lobes, bearings, everything. They don't actually have bearings, it's just got the cap, so that runs on a film of oil. But you lube it all up with engine assembly lube. Dropping them in, follow that sequence. So we'll get that exhaust cam in, and then we'll have a look what we're going to do with the timing on the other side for that inlet side. Alrighty, everything's looking pretty good so far. We've got the cams in, and oh my God, this floor hurts on your knees. Anyway, All the caps are torqued up. It was only 16 Newton meters, so they're pretty light, but they're pretty small bolts, only little M10s, 10 mil, M6 maybe, I don't know. So it's just asked me in the instructions there to roll the cam around so the 2 dots on the back of the cam gears line up, which I've done, and the dowel on the inlet cam should be at the top, ready for the timing chain, which it is, so that's all good. You should be able to just pull that up, line in with that dot there. Bada bing, bada boom. Timing chain installed. Hopefully the timing's right. Dots are at the top, light colored chain. We did the bottom one with a light colored chain. Dots are aligned on the cams. Everything looks good. Holy dooly, well, a bit's changed on this thing. Well, not really, just a few bolt-ons, but since the last time we saw us, I actually went to the Brisbane 4-wheel drive show down the Brisbane Showgrounds on the weekend. We had the motor on display, so I want to throw some extra bits on there so you guys can have a look. If you came down to the show, it was awesome to see you guys. But basically, the only thing I've changed, we've put the valve cover on, did a little bit of painting on that. We've got the new turbo on, so quickly, just got the Garrett G35 990, Plasma Man intake manifold. The boys at Fat Pipes have just started making the exhaust manifold. It's not quite finished yet. We've got a twin plate ceramic clutch from Extreme Outback, bunch of AN fittings, all that kind of stuff from Raceworks. Heaps of good gear, which you will see in next week's episode. So we're pretty much gonna wrap it up with this one. A few of the bolt-ons, a sneak peek of what is to come with this motor. So I'm gonna pretty much get the actual block and that finished now, make sure the motor's buttoned up properly, get all this accessories off of here so we can get the motor in the car. Next episode on this engine, we'll start looking at doing the Haltech wiring harness, ECU, the full complete kit with that, get all these things bolted back on, and we start making some actual power. See you guys then, thanks for watching, see you next time. Guys, if you like this video, make sure to click up here to subscribe to the channel. Click over here for our latest merchandise on our website. And down below or to the side, I'm not sure where it is our last episode. If you haven't watched it, click on that to check it out. See you guys.